the rabbis associated with sort of Pnei Or in the Jewish renewal movement, like Reb Zalman
Jewish
Schachter,
renewal is definitely
Shalomi, and who was a lovely man, by the way, may he rest in peace. Also a sofer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he gave me advice actually about spacing, which I appreciate.
Spacing words, or
Well, he said,
what does that mean? Spacing?
and not every sofer or soferet will agree with this, but he said that when you write a pasuk, a sentence, he said there are rules about how much space you put in between words and how much space you put in between letters. But he said, but at the end of the pasuk, at the end of the sentence, just add a little tiny bit more space. Don't put the exact amount of space that you would between words, because that way, when the person is reading it, their brain will register the very slight wider space. Don't make it 2 spaces, because that's not allowed. The very slight, just like 1.5, 1.25 spaces, because the eye and the brain will still see that. And then then it'll be easier for them to go, that's the end. And then if they're chanting it, then it just makes it easier for them to read and to serve the community.
That's one of the characteristics of medieval Ashkenazi Torah scrolls.
I have seen those. They actually have quite big spaces sometimes.
Very big spaces.
Yeah, like definitely 2 or more spaces.
Oh, there's no question that they're, well, they want to make sure it's not a parasha stuma,
right.
Close.
Yeah, but you have to have quite a few letters for that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, but there's a distinctive space, and by the way, they did it in mezuzahs as well.
Yeah.
And it was done up until the 19th century and possibly even the 20th century. It's not just in the Middle East.
No, I was going to say I've seen one from 1790 that definitely had really wide spaces.
And I've seen
that was from Germany.
And I've seen it in 13th century Torah scrolls.
Really?
So
I'm not surprised.
It's a distinctive Ashkenazi practice to put spaces between verses.
Right.
In Italian Torah scrolls, they actually put a dot between verses, and then which is definitely forbidden in Masechet Sofrim. And then somebody would often come along and erase all the dots.
Right.
And you'll see these Torah scrolls where like there's a scratch off after every verse.
Wow.
And sometimes they missed it, and you can still see, but it's obviously a scratch off in the shape of a dot. So,
but originally, I mean, the Egyptians used to put a dot in between all the words. Because that's before we invented spaces.
In Paleo-Hebrew, they did that.
Exactly.
For sure.
So that's where I was going with that.
Like in the...
we used to put a dot in between every single word because nobody... So there's this midrash, there's this idea that the Torah, when Moses wrote the Torah and God was dictating the Torah to Moses, that he just wrote it as one long utterance, one long sentence.
And
there were no spaces. That's right.
Yeah.
And so you think, oh, this sounds a bit mystical and like some kind of mythological thing, and the story goes on, but really, if you understand like the history of writing, you go, oh, but there wouldn't have been any spaces actually, because we didn't invent spaces
No, but there were
first.
dot dividers between the words.
There were dot dividers, but that didn't take up a whole space.
And then sometimes you had 2 words that were together, and so it'd be like, et haaretz.
Yeah.
And that's not an actual example, but if you look at, for example, in the Siloam inscription, or the Lachish letters, it's very common that when you have a small word, that word is attached to the following word. And we have that represented in the Masoretic text with the makaf, with the hyphen, or essentially 2 words for the purposes of the accents of the trup. The ta'amim are treated as 1 word, and that may reflect these dots that were word dividers. That, by the way, the Samaritans still do that. They divide the words.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Dots.
Yeah.
But you have that in the Lachish letters, and the Arad letters. You have it in the Siloam inscription.
It was normal.
You have it in the Mesha, which isn't Hebrew, it's Moabite, but it's basically the same language.
Yeah.